I'm very happy to record a couple of remembrances of my long-term friend and colleague, Scott Lilienfeld, for the CMBC newsletter. Um, I've known Scott a very long time. We became friends about 40 years ago while undergraduates at Cornell and have been collaborating for, I guess, about the past 30 years. Um, and what I'd like to do is to offer up some comments that remember Scott as a person, as opposed to the persona of Scott that um, often gets described. So my remembrances of Scott started way back when we were at Cornell as undergrads. And Scott studied continuities in personality, and these continuities applied to him, I guess, in an obvious way. So he was pretty much as serious about psychology then as he is now. Even barely knowing him, I remember my friends and I used to refer to him as young Freud, given his commitment to our field and his respect for Freud. But some things that you might not know about Scott back when he was an undergrad, that also was a continuity up until his passing, was his love of music, in particular Bob Dylan and classical music, and within classical Beethoven. And there was a very nice place on campus to study called the Music Room. And Scott, I'm tempted to say he was a denizen there, but he was more of a fixture, I suppose. You'd be hard pressed to go there and not find him there studying, or at least ostensibly studying. And when I needed to find him or wanted to find him, I always knew to look there first. Our friendship really began in force when we both were working on our honors theses and applying to grad school or starting to look at graduate schools. And over those academic wartime experiences, or so they seemed as college juniors, we bonded and became very close friends. And so much so that when we both went off to graduate school, him to University of Minnesota, myself to University of Waterloo, we'd get together on breaks when we were home every a couple times each year um, at a pizza place in a strip mall close to where he lived or where I lived. It was New Jersey after all. And although we both were born in different boroughs of New York, we ended up at that time living in New Jersey, pretty much on the New Jersey shore, about 45 minutes from each other. And, you know, that was a chance, those get-togethers, to explore our tastes and our sensibilities in psychology, to say the things that we liked, we didn't like, that bothered us, the people we respected, the work we respected. And it really was a kind of a formative period, a coming of age for both of us. And I was very happy, and I'm grateful to this day to go through it together with Scott. Um, I was very fortunate to apply for postdocs and get one, postdoctoral fellowships at University of Minnesota in general, but especially because I overlapped with Scott for 2 of my 3 years there. Um, and by that point, Scott was already very accomplished as a researcher. He had published several papers while he was in graduate school, both with his mentors, David Licken and Alka Tellegen, as well as fellow graduate students. And when he was on his internships, he published with some of the psychiatric faculty at those institutions. But you probably, or you may not know of Scott's first publication, which was not in the area of psychology, but rather in the area of chess when he was 16. So Scott was tremendously helpful, very easy to imagine, tremendously helpful as a colleague while I was on my postdoctoral fellowship. Suffice to say, I was not the best writer when I went on my postdoc. I should have been a lot better. There were, I think, 3 separate mistakes in the title of my dissertation alone. And Scott, working with Scott on a number of papers as a postdoc while he was still a graduate student, really helped solidify my writing and put it on a much better footing than it was before then. And we then started to collaborate, and I was lucky to have collaborated with Scott for 30 years on a variety of topics, topics within clinical psychology, especially having to do with various issues in various substantive and methodological and even statistical issues in the classification of psychopathology. In fact, my very first journal publication was with Scott in that topic. Also, on replication and the replicability crisis, and then also on narcissism among US presidents and what that predicted, a topic that preceded our former president that we worked on together. And in addition to these papers, I was very happy to and felt privileged to be an author, a co-author on some of Scott's graduate students' work with him, as well as the reverse, for him to be a co-author with us on some papers. And of course, as everybody knows, Scott went on to this gigantic reputation in the field, being one of its most influential members up until his passing. What about some things you may not know about Scott? Scott, along his journey, had a remarkable and rare talent of being able to turn what was a hobby into an avocation, into a vocation, or at least an area of research that you wouldn't think would maybe be possible or would have grown out of his initial interest in it. And some examples here are philosophical issues in diagnostic classification, and especially his work critiquing popular treatments that have questionable efficacy. And one way in which this started was by collaborating with his ex-wife, Lori Marino, on studies that looked at dolphin-assisted therapies for individuals with autism spectrum disorders, looking at eye movement desensitization research or therapies. And I remember thinking at the time that he took these up that, well, I mean, this is an interesting curiosity. And then 5 years later, he was the major expert in that area, and it became this major area in the field, probably because he was an expert in that area. In addition to his work as a researcher, Scott had an indelible impact on our department and on the university, and more broadly, as everybody knows, on the field of psychology as well. It was an odd meeting that I went to where you didn't hear Scott's name mentioned and his research discussed in one context or another. But Scott also was a real character, and as such, he had some quirks. And so a couple of them come to mind. Often when Scott was at a talk, whether it was a student's talk in the department or a colloquium speaker or at a panel at a national conference, he had certain mannerisms that made him look, quite frankly, like William F. Buckley back in the day. And this was so true, and so true so early on, that his fellow graduate students at University of Minnesota would hold more or less informal contests to see who could do the best imitation of these Buckley-esque looks on Scott's part. Another mannerism he had that And these latter two, as long as I've known him and as many times as I've seen him do these, I have to confess, even to this day, I don't really understand. So one was when we would go out to dinner, which we did quite often through the years, he would take off his watch and set it in front of him. And there are multiple theories about why he did this. First of all, through much of his life, he wore what to me looked like a very heavy watch. And so I thought maybe this was a chance for him to get some relief from it. But another person's theory was that he was so serious about his work that he could only sort of allocate a certain amount of time being away from it before feeling the need from within to get back to it. And then a third quirk was in the middle of our faculty meetings, when Scott had to leave the room, including sometimes to use the bathroom, rather than doing what the majority of faculty did, which is surreptitiously get up and sneak out, he would stroll right across the middle of our room as we were gathered in a circle, and at times even announce, "I'll be back shortly, I'm going to the bathroom." Go figure. So, well, needless to say, Scott had a huge impact on all of us. And there's not a day that goes by that I don't miss him, miss joking around with him, saying what we liked about a faculty meeting, and then saying what we didn't like about a faculty meeting or a talk or a proposal meeting, you name it. And he's made a tremendous contribution, and I'm happy to be able to honor it, and especially by talking about him as a person, and maybe rounding out some of the more popular and popularized images of him to lend a more fuller characterization of him than one might get otherwise. Thanks for this opportunity.
Hi, my name is Shauna Bowes, and I'm currently a fourth-year graduate student in the Emory University Clinical Psychology doctoral program. I started working with Scott when I was a junior at Emory. So I went to Emory University for undergrad. I was a neuroscience major. And Scott was truly a dedicated mentor at all levels of training. Even when I was an undergraduate, he made sure to set aside time to meet with me and talk about research and talk about professional goals. And he always was warm and inviting and friendly. Scott was the kind of mentor that really wanted to build you up. He didn't see any point in making you feel small or irrelevant. He wanted you to do good research and feel excited about it. Scott was, again, just a dedicated mentor. That's something that's so invaluable in our field, to find someone that is kind and respects you and pushes you forward and makes sure that you're reaching a high bar of success or achievement. No matter what Scott was studying, I knew that he was someone that I could learn from and that I could work with. And in my first year of graduate school, the lab really shifted direction. So Scott's really well known for studying personality disorders, specifically psychopathic personality disorder. I think he's always been known for many things, especially his work on pseudoscience and how to do strong, rigorous science. But I think he was really especially known for psychopathic personality research. And as a lab, we started transitioning and really stepping into that pseudoscience world. We wanted to ask questions like, what makes people hold irrational beliefs, and what do we do about it? So Scott and I started focusing on a construct called intellectual humility, and we grew interested in things like conspiratorial ideation and political polarization, and saw intellectual humility as this compelling vehicle to understand irrationality. And it was such an exciting direction. It was overwhelming in many ways at first, but it was so exciting. And I was along for the ride. And it's been such a gift going in this direction. I feel like this research is really just getting started. It's so timely, it's so consequential. And I've learned so, so much. And I could really see myself doing this kind of research forever in my career. It's so compelling to me. And that was a gift that Scott gave me in many ways, was taking the lab in this direction and inviting me on this journey to do new science and just to continue growing. In terms of who Scott was as a person, I think his mentorship really reflected who he was as a person. I can't say it enough. He was just wonderfully warm and kind. And even though he was so successful and famous in our field of psychology, he really valued what he did. He wanted to be a good teacher. He wanted to be a good mentor. And he wanted to connect with you as a person. He was just an entirely special person, wonderfully unique, very quirky, very stubborn. And after Scott's passing, what really struck me was the outpouring of affection for him. Again, he was a titan in our field, and we can't really say that genuinely too often. He really was a titan. And the outpouring of affection wasn't, oh, he was prolific. Those comments certainly came up. People talked about how prolific he was and incredible his science was, but they also shared many personal memories and talked about Scott's spirit. And even though it's so painful and sad, it was really gratifying to see those responses after his passing, that people knew that Scott was a good person, that people knew that Scott was unique and so special outside of his scholarship, which already was unique and special in of itself. I miss Scott dearly. He was one of the most special people in my life. He made a permanent and lasting impact on me, certainly professionally. I could not have imagined learning as much as I have about science and writing and psychology without him. And he affected me personally. I struggle with feeling confident in my research, as many other scholars and academics do. And again, he really always built me up and was always there for me and helped me become my best self. And I do not take that for granted. I see myself as a Scott student, and I will always be a Scott student. I think that impression you carry with you in your career and your life. And even though I wish he was with me today to see the fruits of his labor, especially with this new research, he still is in this work and he still is in what I do. So thank you for allowing me to share some of my thoughts and impressions of Scott. And I look forward to hearing what others have to say as well.
Scott was enormously influential in my life, much more so than I think is typical for a graduate advisor. He felt a very strong sense of responsibility for his students' intellectual, their career trajectory. He very much took us under his wing, and he was both deeply kind and brilliant. And more people know the brilliant side, but it was wonderful to learn from him in as close a way as me and his other students did. He taught me how to think and write and do rigorous science. He was a great and wonderful person, and it's such a tragedy to have lost him this early. Thing about Scott is that his most memorable research, he almost injected his personality into his research, but not in a way that weakened it, in a way that made it stronger. One thing that made me want to work with him was he wrote a paper about scientific thinking and how we should be very skeptical of our own hypotheses, how we should kind of, as scientists, try to bend over backwards to prove ourselves wrong. And it's only after we do that, and if even after that we still think that we're right, then we can be more confident. The way he wrote about science and thinking was so resonant and elegant. it almost didn't matter what he was doing. He the more empirical side of his research is personality disorders and psychopathy. And coming in, I had done work on depression and how certain beliefs bear, like philosophical beliefs bear on mental disorders and that kind of thing. It had nothing to do with personality at all. But Scott wasn't really selecting for that in his students. I think he liked to take people who were less familiar with the material or just shortly out of college, because I think he really valued the opportunity to shape the students' intellectual growth. The rawness of my thinking and knowledge of the area I'd end up doing research in, I think was perfectly fine for him. I'm so glad that I decided to work with him. He's someone who was staunchly behind his students no matter what. There was never one second where you felt like he did not have your best interests at heart, the students' best interests at heart, even in moments where you could tell that he disagreed with you, a point you were making or a decision, whatever. He somehow was always able to see the bigger picture, and you felt able to experiment as a thinker and as a professional. It's incredibly valuable. I think it's something that I hadn't recognized until he was gone, just like how exceptional he was. I miss him.